There is a peculiar silence that lives beneath the noise of the world, a silence so complete and unyielding that it cannot be touched by the chatter of the mind or the endless machinery of society. This silence is not mere absence of sound, it is the ancient heartbeat of existence, the still ground beneath the ceaseless movement of thoughts, desires, and illusions. It is here, within the power of stillness, that one begins to glimpse the possibility of stepping beyond the simulation, the constructed reality in which most of humanity seems endlessly entangled. To speak of a simulation is not to indulge in science fiction or futuristic speculation. The simulation is not necessarily made of wires, screens, or digital codes, but of mental constructs, social programming, and the ceaseless flickering of thoughts that obscure the real. We live, most of us, in a labyrinth of reflections, mirrors, bouncing mirrors, a theater where the actors have forgotten they are playing roles. The body wakes, performs, consumes, achieves, and repeats, yet somewhere inside there lingers a vague knowing. This cannot be the whole of existence. There must be something beneath the curtain, behind the veil, beyond the screen of appearances. Stillness is the key that cracks the code. When one stops, truly stops, when one is no longer hypnotized by the spinning of the wheel, the gears of the simulation grind to a halt. In that pause, the world reveals itself in its raw, unmasked truth. A bird's wing cutting through air becomes a scripture. The way sunlight bends on the edge of a glass of water becomes a revelation. The stillness does not add anything new. Rather, it strips away what never belonged in the first place. It dismantles the false urgency, the programmed loops, the illusions of separation that keep us prisoners within the artificial construct of our own minds. It is easy to believe that stillness is passivity, that to be still is to retreat from life. But the stillness of which we speak is not withdrawal, it is awakening. It is not idleness, but the most profound form of participation in existence. Imagine standing at the center of a storm, the winds howling, the trees bent near breaking, yet at the eye of the storm there is perfect calm. That calm is not detached from the storm. It is its very balance, its invisible axis. Likewise, stillness does not reject movement, but gives meaning to it. In the same way silence gives shape to sound, or space gives form to objects. From the moment we are born, the simulation begins weaving itself around us. Family expectations, cultural narratives, economic demands, even language itself, all are threads in the web that tells us what to value, how to think, who to become. These layers form a matrix of identity, so thick that most never question it. They move through life as avatars, performing routines encoded not by their own essence, but by collective conditioning. And yet, there are moments, brief and fleeting, when the script falters. A sudden encounter with beauty, a brush with mortality, a mysterious dream that lingers into waking all remind us that there is a deeper reality waiting to be discovered. Stillness is the doorway into that reality. It does not require belief, doctrine, or complex practice. It requires only the willingness to stop, to turn one's attention inward, to step back from the constant flickering projections of the mind. In that suspension, the illusion unravels. The simulation loses its grip because its fuel is our constant identification with thought and motion. Withdraw that energy, and the construct falters. Withdraw it long enough, and one begins to see through the cracks into the radiant ground of being that was always present. But why call it an exit? Why not simply a shift, a deepening, an expansion? Because to encounter stillness in its true depth is to realize that the life we thought we were living was never entirely real. It was a dream layered upon a dream, a performance within a play. The exit is not escape in the ordinary sense, it is awakening from a dream we mistook for reality. When the actor remembers they are not the mask they wear, when the dreamer realizes they are more than the dream, something irrevocable occurs. The simulation loses its totalizing hold, and freedom begins. Yet this freedom is not otherworldly, nor is it a retreat into some abstract void. It manifests in the most ordinary things, in the ways we see, feel, and respond to life. The power of stillness awakens us to a dimension of presence that reorders our relationship with everything, the people we love, the work we do, the very experience of being alive. It makes us see that life was never meant to be a prison of urgency or a treadmill of striving, but a field of consciousness flowering in infinite forms. The journey of exiting the SEO simulation through stillness is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. Each individual must walk it in their own way, yet the path is timeless, echoed in the teachings of sages, mystics, poets, and seekers across history. From the meditating monk in a mountain cave to the philosopher gazing at the stars, from the indigenous elder listening to the wind to the modern seeker questioning the noise of modernity, all have, in their own way, touched upon the same truth, that silence is not emptiness, but fullness beyond measure. And so, we begin here, at the threshold. To speak of the power of stillness is not to merely describe a technique or promote a lifestyle, but to invite a radical reorientation of perception. It is to consider that what we call the real world is not reality at all, but a projection, and that through the art of stopping, of sinking into the unmoving heart of existence, we can step outside the walls of the simulation. What lies beyond is not something new to acquire, but something ancient to remember. If the introduction opened the threshold, then here we step into the architecture itself, exploring the pillars that hold this strange construct we call the simulation, and how stillness reveals its hidden fractures. The mind hungers for definitions, for neat boxes in which to place mystery, but here we must tread more carefully. To name the core themes is not to pin them down like specimens beneath glass, but to let them breathe as living truths, to trace their outlines as one might trace constellations in the night sky, points of light connected by imagination, suggesting a deeper order that cannot be fully charted. At the heart of the simulation is movement, ceaseless and intoxicating. Thoughts ripple, emotions surge, desires ignite, memories replayed, and the mind rushes from one spark to another like a moth chasing flames. This motion is what convinces us that life is happening out there, always ahead, always slipping away. The simulation thrives on restlessness. It is a theater powered by motion, and so the very act of stopping threatens its existence. Stillness is its undoing, because in stillness the projections fade and the bare screen of awareness remains. That screen is reality. The dance of illusions may continue, but one no longer mistakes the flickering images for truth. Another pillar of the simulation is identification. We mistake the mask for the face, the role for the self, the thoughts for the thinker. A name, a job, a story from the past all become woven into a tight net, binding us into a character we believe is all we are. But stillness begins to dissolve this identification. When the mind grows quiet, when one sinks beneath the chatter, it becomes evident that the self we cling to is but a costume worn on the stage of existence. Who then is the one who observes, who feels the breath moving in and out, who notices the thought arise and fall? In that recognition lies the beginning of liberation. The simulation is also upheld by time, that relentless river dragging us into past regrets and future anxieties. We are rarely here, in the present, because the simulation insists that meaning is elsewhere, back there, in what we lost, or ahead in what we hope to gain. But stillness pulls us into the eternal present, where time loses its tyrannical hold. In stillness, a single moment stretches wide as eternity. The tick of a clock no longer feels like a step toward death, but like a pulse within the infinite body of life. This collapse of time is not an escape from responsibility. It is a rediscovery of what is always true, that the present is the only place life ever happens. A deeper theme emerges when we consider illusion and truth. The simulation depends on illusion, not in the sense of deliberate deception, but in the sense of a veil like mist covering a mountain. We see shapes but not their essence, surfaces but not depths. Stillness is the rising sun that burns away the mist. In silence, perception sharpens, and one begins to see that what appeared solid was transient, what seemed separate was interconnected, and what looked meaningless was alive with presence. The veil does not vanish forever, drifts, returns, reforms, but once one has glimpsed the mountain beneath, one can never again confuse the mist for the whole of reality. Yet stillness is not only the dismantling of illusions, it is also the revelation of truth. Here lies a paradox. To exit the simulation is not to destroy it, but to see through it, to recognize it as a play of consciousness rather than the prison of reality. The world does not vanish when we awaken. It becomes luminous, the same streets, the same conversations, the same tasks at hand, but seen now with a clarity that dissolves their heaviness. The power of stillness is not in erasing the simulation, but in shifting our relationship to it. We stop being prisoners and become witnesses, participants, even creators. There is also the theme of surrender, for stillness cannot be forced. One cannot wrestle the mind into silence, any more than one can order the ocean to be calm. The effort itself is part of the simulation. Instead, stillness comes like a gift, a natural flowering when one stops grasping, stops chasing, stops clinging. It is the art of letting go, of releasing control, of allowing awareness to simply rest in itself. In that surrender, the exit reveals itself not as an act of escape, but as a falling inward into what was always here. Perhaps the most profound theme is unity. The simulation thrives on separation, me versus you, inner versus outer, human versus nature, but stillness collapses these walls. In the silence of pure being, the boundaries blur, and one senses the undercurrent of oneness. The breath entering your lungs is the same air that moments ago brushed the wings of a bird. The heartbeat in your chest echoes the pulse of stars. To exit the simulation is to wake from the dream of isolation into the truth of communion. And yet, one must be careful not to turn these themes into another conceptual prison. To label the pillars, to describe the architecture, is useful for pointing the way, but the real entry into stillness lies beyond words. Words can suggest, but they cannot contain the signposts pointing to a silence that defies all language. What matters is not the description of the doorway, but the act of stepping through. Has retraced these core themes: the restlessness of movement, the prison of identification, the illusion of time, the veil of perception, the paradox of surrender, and the awakening of unity. We begin to see the contours of how the simulation operates, and why stillness holds such transformative power. But the intellect alone cannot carry us forward. We must now descend into deeper symbolic narratives, stories and images that touch the soul in ways beyond reason. For symbols are the language of the unconscious, and the unconscious is the soil where the simulation grows. By speaking in myth, parable, and image, we draw nearer to the essence of what it means to exit the construct and awaken to truth. The mind often grasps at abstract ideas and struggles to hold them, but the soul responds to symbols, to stories, to images that bypass intellect and touch something more primal. If stillness is the key to exiting the simulation, then symbols are the maps that guide us through its labyrinth. They are not instructions in the ordinary sense, but resonances that awaken remembrance. In speaking of deeper symbolic narratives, we enter into a realm where philosophy becomes myth, and myth becomes a mirror in which we recognize truths we already carry within us. Imagine first the image of a vast cosmic ocean. Upon its surface, waves rise and fall in restless patterns, each wave believing itself to be separate, fragile, born only to crash and vanish. The simulation is the surface of this ocean, the constant movement, the endless becoming, the illusion that one wave is distinct from another. But beneath the surface lies the depth, unmoving, infinite, silent. Stillness is to dive beneath, to discover that all the waves were never separate, that they were simply expressions of the same ocean. To exit the simulation is not to destroy the waves, but to remember that you are the ocean itself, vast and eternal, playing at being a crest for a fleeting moment. Another story unfolds in the image of a grand theater. Life within the simulation is a performance where every actor has forgotten their role is only a role. The king believes he is truly sovereign. The beggar believes he is truly destitute. The lovers believe their drama will last forever. The masks are worn so tightly that faces are forgotten. Stillness, in this narrative, is like stepping backstage, peeling off the costume, and realizing that the actor is free, that the drama is but a play staged for the joy of creation. To exit the simulation is to walk beyond the curtain, to bow to the performance with gratitude, and to remember your essence beyond all roles. There is also the parable of the mirror maze. The simulation is like a hole of reflections, where everywhere you turn you see distorted images of yourself, some larger, some smaller, some grotesque, some flattering. You chase one reflection and recoil from another, endlessly disoriented, forgetting that the reflections are not real. Stillness is the moment you stop running, stop flinching, stop chasing. In the silence of that pause, you notice the space between the mirrors, the empty room holding them all. You realize that behind every reflection is nothing but clear, open presence. To exit the simulation is to step away from the mirrors and rediscover the one who was never reflected in them at all. A different image comes from the ancient forests. Picture a tree that has grown tall, its branches stretched wide, its leaves fluttering in the wind. The simulation is the branches, endlessly swaying, distracted by storms, reaching for the sun. Each branch thinks itself the whole, vulnerable to breaking, but stillness is the root system deep beneath the soil, vast and unseen, drinking from hidden waters. To exit the simulation is to remember the roots, to sink back into the silent ground that nourishes all growth. The storms may come, the branches may bend, but the tree that remembers its roots cannot be uprooted. The sages have long told a symbolic tale of the sleeping dreamer. They say that life within the simulation is like a dream in which the dreamer forgets they are dreaming. The characters appear solid, the dangers feel real, the pleasures seem intoxicating. Fear and desire keep the dreamer bound within the unfolding story. Stillness, then, is the moment of lucid dreaming, when the dreamer pauses and realizes, this is a dream. In that instant, the dream loses its grip. It does not vanish, but it transforms. The dreamer can now move with freedom, knowing that they are not confined by the narrative. To exit the simulation is to awaken to the dreamer's nature, to live lucidly even in the waking dream we call reality. Perhaps the most ancient symbol of all is the still pond. Drop a pebble into its waters, and ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection of the sky. The simulation is the rippling disturbances upon the surface, endless waves of thought and reaction. But when the pond grows still, the sky is reflected perfectly, the stars revealed in their clarity. Stillness is this unbroken mirror, the state in which reality reflects itself without distortion. To exit the simulation is to let the waters of the mind settle so that what is reflected is no longer illusion but truth itself. These narratives are not merely poetic embellishments, they carry within them encoded wisdom. The ocean reveals the truth of unity, the theater exposes the illusion of roles, the mirror maze illustrates the trap of identification, the tree roots teach us grounding, the dreamer points to awakening, and the still pond shows us the clarity of silence. Together, they speak to different layers of the human condition, offering doorways through which anyone might begin to recognize the simulation and find the exit dot. Yet, there is a subtle danger. Here, one could collect these symbols, admire them, analyze them, even debate their meaning, and still remain firmly inside the simulation. The mind loves to turn stories into structures, into cages of interpretation. But the true power of symbolic narratives lies not in dissecting them, but in letting them work upon us like seeds. When a symbol enters the heart, it bypasses the restless intellect and awakens remembrance. The ocean is not merely an idea, it is something you feel in your very breath. The dreamer is not only a metaphor, it is a whisper, reminding you to awaken. Even now, in this way, deeper symbolic narratives act as bridges. They connect the ineffable with the comprehensible, the infinite with the human. They show us that to exit the simulation is not to run from life, but to re-enter it with new eyes, to live from the ocean rather than the wave, from the roots rather than the branches, from the dreamer rather than the dream. Stillness is not absence, it is the ground of presence from which everything else arises. The danger of philosophies that soar too high is that they may become untethered, circling endlessly in abstract heavens without ever touching the ground of lived experience. Yet the true measure of stillness, and of any awakening beyond the simulation, is not how eloquently one can describe it, but how deeply it reshapes daily life. To speak of practical integration is to bridge the infinite with the intimate, to see how the power of stillness is not reserved for monks in caves or mystics in deserts, but available here and now, amidst traffic, deadlines, conversations, and the small rituals of ordinary living. Stillness, when integrated, alters perception at its root. Imagine walking down a crowded street, where normally the noise, the rush, the swirl of faces creates a fog of distraction. But when one carries stillness, within the same street feels different. The noise is not gone, yet it does not penetrate. Each sound is allowed to rise and fade like waves upon the ocean, while at the center you remain unshaken. This is not withdrawal from the world, but a new way of moving through it. The simulation continues its flickering play, but you are no longer captured by every flash of light. In relationships, stillness becomes a revolution. Much of human connection is tangled in projection. In the endless dance of roles and expectations, we react to others not as they are, but as we imagine them to be, or as they trigger our own unresolved patterns. The simulation thrives in this. feeding on conflict and misunderstanding, but stillness pauses the chain of reaction. In a moment of silence before responding, you discover freedom. You listen more deeply, hear not just words but the spaces between them. You sense the vulnerability beneath anger, the longing beneath defensiveness. Stillness allows love to emerge not sentimental, but spacious, a love that is simply presence itself. In work, too, stillness shifts the paradigm. The simulation tells us that productivity equals worth, that we must keep moving, achieving, accumulating, lest we fall behind. But in stillness, we realize that true creativity does not arise from frantic striving, but from quiet openness. The best ideas come not when the mind is busy, but when it rests, when there is space for inspiration to enter. A painter stares at the blank canvas until silence breaks into color. A writer listens to the pause between words until the next sentence arrives. Even in business or problem solving, stillness is the invisible catalyst, the space in which solutions that were once hidden suddenly appear. Stillness also transforms our relationship with suffering. The simulation whispers that discomfort must be avoided at all costs, numbed with distraction, drowned in consumption. Yet pain, left unresisted, in stillness, becomes a teacher. In silence, one sees that pain is not permanent, not absolute. It is a wave that rises and falls. Fear loses its claws when met with presence rather than panic. Anxiety dissolves when one no longer identifies with the spinning story, but watches it as a passing cloud. Stillness does not promise a life without storms, but it anchors us so deeply that no storm can uproot us. Perhaps one of the most profound implications of stillness is the collapse of the false urgency that drives so much of modern life. The simulation convinces us that everything must be done now, that we are perpetually behind, that peace will come only after the next achievement. Stillness reveals the lie. In silence, we discover that this moment is already complete. Nothing is missing, nothing is lacking. This does not breed laziness, but a kind of fearless calm. From this calm, action arises more efficiently, more creatively, more authentically, because it is no longer driven by desperation, but by alignment with the flow of life itself. Even the body begins to shift under the influence of stillness. The nervous system, long held hostage by the simulation's demands, softens into balance. Breathing deepens, the heart rate steadies, tension dissolves. Health is not merely physical, but rooted in harmony, and stillness restores that harmony. At the foundation, science now confirms what mystics always knew. Silence heals. It rewires the brain, soothes the body, renews the mind. In this way, the practical and the cosmic converge. The mystical art of stillness becomes the most practical medicine of all. But perhaps the most important integration lies in how stillness redefines freedom. We are told that freedom means choice, options, the ability to pursue whatever path we desire. Yet so long as the simulation dictates our desires, this freedom is counterfeit. Real freedom begins when we are no longer compelled by every impulse, no longer enslaved by every thought. Stillness grants us the space to choose, not from compulsion, but from clarity. It is the freedom of the lucid dreamer, awake within the dream, able to move with awareness rather than blind reaction. And here lies the great paradox. Exiting the simulation does not mean abandoning the world. It does not mean fleeing responsibilities, discarding relationships, or retreating to mountaintops. It means living within the world but not being of it. It means tending to your work, your family, your duties, but carrying within you a stillness that renders you untouchable by the illusions that once enslaved you. You engage with the simulation as one might engage with Artemis, appreciative, yet never forgetting it is a play of light upon a screen. This is the practical integration of stillness. It is a shift in perception that ripples into every corner of life. From the smallest gestures to the grandest endeavors, it does not demand dramatic changes in external circumstances, but awakens a radical transformation in how those circumstances are lived. You may still walk the same path, but the eyes with which you see it are no longer the same. There comes a moment, after circling through the philosophy, the imagery, the lived practices, when one must finally turn inward and listen. For all the words, all the symbols, all the concepts we have explored, stillness itself remains untouched. By them it does not need to be explained, nor defended, nor proved. It waits, quietly, beneath the noise, as it always has. To speak of the power of stillness and the possibility of exiting the simulation is ultimately to point you back to what you already know, what you have always known, but perhaps forgotten in the endless churn of movement and distraction. The simulation is not some external machine that must be dismantled. It is the web of illusions woven within our own minds, the restless thoughts, the unquestioned assumptions, the insatiable hungers for more. To exit it is not to run away, but to stop feeding it. The exit is not a doorway out into some other dimension, but a falling inward, a homecoming to what is always here beneath the noise. Stillness is not the absence of life, but the presence of life in its purest form. It is the center of the storm, the roots beneath the tree, the silence that holds every sound. If there is a call to be heard, it is not a call to renounce the world, but to awaken within it. You need not abandon your relationships, your work, your passions. What must be abandoned is the false urgency, the blind identification, the constant forgetting of who you truly are. When you remember stillness, you remember that you are not the wave but the ocean, not the mask but the actor, not the dream but the dreamer. This remembrance is the liberation. The simulation does not dissolve into nothing. It remains, but its spell is broken. You can play within it, create within it, love within it, but you are no longer its prisoner. The transformational power of stillness lies in its simplicity. There is no elaborate ritual required, no distant place you must travel to, no future you must wait for. You need only stop, right now, in this breath, in this moment. Notice the silence between your thoughts, the space beneath your sensations, the presence that is watching even now. That is stillness. That is the ground of your being. That is the exit. And here is the paradoxical gift. The moment you step into stillness, you discover there was never truly a simulation to escape. The prison was made of shadows. The chains were made of dreams. Reality was never elsewhere. It was always here, waiting beneath the noise. You are not entering a new world. You are awakening to the world as it truly is. Every bird's song, every raindrop, every glance from a loved one is infused with a radiance you had forgotten to see. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because it changed, but because you did. So the call is simple, yet profound. Stop running. Stop searching outside. Stop believing that freedom lies in the next achievement, the next possession, the next distraction. Freedom is here, in stillness. Sit quietly for a moment. Breathe. Listen. Let the world spin as it always does, and discover the unmoving center within you. This is not an escape from life. It is the deepest participation in life. When you touch stillness, you touch the eternal heartbeat of existence. Do not mistake this for a one-time event. The simulation will attempt to reclaim you. Old habits will return. Old illusions will whisper. But once you have tasted stillness, you can never again fully believe the dream. You will return, again and again, to the silence that holds it all. Each return strengthens your freedom. Each pause deepens your clarity, until eventually you live anchored in stillness, even as the world whirls around you. And so, the invitation is not to chase enlightenment, not to strive for some distant goal, but to awaken now, to place your hand upon the quiet pulse within, and know that you are already free. The simulation was never stronger than your awareness. Stillness is the great equalizer, the key hidden in plain sight, the doorway that was always open. Step through, not by force, but by surrender. Step through, not by fleeing the dream, but by remembering the dreamer. This is the power of stillness. This is how you exit the simulation, not by escaping life, but by entering it more deeply than ever before. Not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you have always been. Not by conquering the world, but by resting in the silence that contains the world. The journey is not outward, but inward. And the destination is not a place, but a presence. It is here, now, waiting. It always was, it always will be. Will you stop long enough to hear it? Will you pause long enough to feel it? The choice is yours. The door is open. The silence is calling. Step through.